It begins in the silence of a locked archive. Dust settles on boxes no one dares open, not because they're forgotten, but because they are remembered too well by those who would rather the rest of us didn't. Inside those boxes are fragments of our world that don't quite fit, like puzzle pieces from a different game. Ancient objects with no business being as advanced as they are. Relics that whisper of a timeline out of sync with our own, of knowledge once held and then deliberately buried. Across continents and centuries, certain artifacts defy classification. They weren't supposed to exist, and yet they do. They're real, tangible, and oddly consistent in what they suggest, that someone, or something, possessed knowledge far beyond what Earth's civilizations were capable of at the time. These are not mere myths or speculative fiction. They are physical objects, studied in labs, examined by professionals, then quietly removed from public discourse. This story is not about proving aliens or denying science. It's about confronting the discomfort of the unknown. It's about the quiet places where history resists being told in straight lines. It's about humility, the recognition that for all our advancements, there are still things we can't explain, and maybe never will. These are the forbidden artifacts, 10 objects that have haunted archaeologists, confounded physicists, and provoked silent meetings in closed-door labs. Each one is a paradox in material form, a battery from ancient Mesopotamia that functions on principles discovered only in the last century, a crystal skull that pulses with light in response to human touch, or a wedge of aluminum dated to an age when metallurgy hadn't even begun. The pattern is unnerving in its consistency. When such artifacts are found, they're quietly taken, stored away. Access restricted. Public explanations offered are often vague, dismissive, or framed in convenient narratives. Oh geez. And over time, memory fades. Until someone digs again. But what if we reassembled these forgotten puzzles? Not to sensationalize them, but to reflect on what they mean, where they came from, and what kind of intelligence might have left them behind. What if we simply asked the question, what happens to history when the artifacts don't follow the script? In this series, we'll walk through the halls of time with a flashlight in hand, illuminating corners where science and mystery intersect. Each chapter will focus on one artifact, one anomaly, not to claim we have answers, but to open a window into the questions themselves. This is not a tale of conspiracy. It's a meditation on limits, of what we know and what we assume we know. A reflection on how humanity has always moved forward by first admitting what it doesn't understand. So let's begin, not with certainty, but with curiosity. Let's dust off those forgotten boxes, the ones someone once tried to hide, because inside them might be more than lost history. They might hold the key to understanding who we really are, and who else might have walked this earth long before us. The desert wind was still that morning in July 1947, as rancher Mac Brazel rode out across the arid plains near Roswell, New Mexico. What he found scattered across the sand didn't look like anything he'd seen before. Silvery shards, impossibly light, yet unbreakable. A strange memory metal that would bend and fold, only to snap back into its original shape, like time refusing to stay still. The official story came quickly. A weather balloon. Case closed. But those who touched the debris knew better. Intelligence Officer Jesse Marcel, the man who first examined the wreckage, held fragments in his hands that were lighter than aluminum, tougher than steel. No tool could cut it. Fire wouldn't burn it. This wasn't from any factory or forge known to man. Over the decades, scientists who quietly studied the fragments confirmed what Marcel had long suspected. The material didn't obey the rules of our world. Its atomic structure showed engineering at the molecular level, ordered patterns more precise than anything our machines could produce at the time. Even today, it remains classified, sealed within vaults at research facilities few will ever see. They called it memory metal. But its properties go beyond mere elasticity. When exposed to certain frequencies, the fragments changed, becoming more flexible, more conductive, even altering color, as if it could be told what to be. Some scientists described it as programmable matter. Others whispered about nanotechnology centuries ahead of where we are now. Most disturbingly, the isotopic ratios within the metal didn't match any naturally occurring on Earth. It was as though it had been born in the heart of a distant star. And yet here it was, recovered not from a science lab, but from a quiet patch of desert, surrounded by cattle fences and tumbleweeds. Attempts to reverse engineer the material sparked a new wave of innovation in composite technologies. Some of our most advanced materials trace their lineage back to those experiments. Yet the core mystery remains untouched. How could a substance like this exist at a time when transistor radios were still considered cutting edge? More than 75 years have passed since the Roswell incident, but the memory metal hasn't aged. Its secrets haven't dulled. If anything, the questions have deepened. Who made it? What was it for? And why did it end up in the New Mexico desert? Some suggest it was never meant to be found. Others believe it was the result of a crash, a mistake, a tear in some larger narrative we're not privy to. But whatever the cause, the fragments endure, and so does the silence around them. The Roswell memory metal stands as a quiet contradiction. It shouldn't exist, and yet it does. It refuses to degrade, refuses to reveal, and above all refuses to fit within the story we've written about ourselves. It's a relic not just of an event, but of a possibility, one that still waits, buried beneath layers of secrecy and sand. Sometimes the past doesn't speak through words or bones. Sometimes it speaks through metal, metal that remembers a shape we never imagined, from a place we've never known. In the heart of modern-day Iraq, beneath layers of sand and forgotten history, a German archaeologist unearthed something that made no sense. A clay jar, sealed with bitumen containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. That was 1936. At first glance, it resembled a primitive battery. But as scientists looked closer, the Baghdad battery, as it came to be called, revealed something far more extraordinary. For decades, mainstream scholars dismissed the find as a curiosity. Perhaps it was used for simple electroplating, they speculated, a clever anomaly. But private, classified tests conducted years later told a different story. When filled with acidic solution, the batteries produced a steady electrical current, not for minutes, but for months. And when multiple jars were connected in a series, the voltage output matched what we use today in low-voltage modern systems. How could such technology exist in 250 BCE? That's nearly 2 millennia before the invention of the voltaic pile, before any known understanding of electricity. But the real shock came with the materials analysis. Inside the copper cylinders were microscopic wires, thread-like filaments invisible to the naked eye. They were arranged with precision that would challenge even our finest tools today. No ancient culture should have been able to craft such components. The wires were resistant to corrosion, a feat of metallurgy that even modern engineers struggle with. More baffling still, the copper alloys contained trace elements not found naturally in the region. Some of the isotopes detected in the wires matched those found in rare earth materials typically associated with deep space origins. It wasn't just the batteries that drew attention. As classified excavations continued, archaeologists discovered long-buried chambers laced with copper wiring stretching for kilometers. It wasn't a single artifact. It was a system, a network, an electrical grid beneath the ruins of an ancient civilization hidden for thousands of years. The implications are staggering. It wasn't that ancient people accidentally stumbled on electrochemical reactions. They understood them. They harnessed them. The Baghdad batteries weren't isolated incidents. They were functional pieces of infrastructure. Could it be that long before the modern age, electricity wasn't just a scientific curiosity, but an everyday tool. Were these batteries powering something greater? A communication device, perhaps, or medical equipment? Or were they remnants of knowledge handed down by a source not bound by time or geography? Of course, these questions have never been answered officially. The batteries are locked away, studied only under layers of classification. Their story, like so many others, has been reduced to a footnote in textbooks, a paragraph in obscure journals, but the evidence remains. The Baghdad batteries suggest a forgotten chapter in human history, one in which electricity was not discovered but rediscovered, one in which someone somewhere understood the flow of electrons long before we knew their name. Perhaps they weren't batteries at all, but clues. Clues left behind to test whether, one day, we'd be curious enough to look beyond the surface. In clay jars from a forgotten empire, we may have found the flicker of a light bulb, lit not by accident, but by intention, across the vast expanse of time. Beneath the Aegean Sea, off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, divers searching for treasure instead uncovered something far stranger, a corroded hunk of bronze encrusted with marine growth, housed in a sunken Roman shipwreck. For decades, the artifact lay misunderstood. Then, as X-ray scans peeled back its layers, the truth emerged. This was no ordinary relic. It was a machine. And not just any machine, a computer. Known now as the Antikythera mechanism, it has been celebrated as an ancient Greek marvel, capable of predicting eclipses and tracking the movements of celestial bodies. But that's just the surface. Recent, highly classified analysis revealed something even more puzzling. Embedded deep within its gears were crystalline components, tiny, precise structures that don't belong to the classical world. These weren't merely decorative or accidental. The components operated using quantum mechanical principles, leveraging phenomena like superposition and entanglement to process information. Inside a lump of ancient bronze, scientists discovered computational behaviors consistent with quantum processing, something we only began exploring seriously in the 21st century. The gears themselves, over 100 in number, were cut with ratios that didn't just reflect astronomy. They matched constants of quantum physics. Some rotated in response to their counterparts, even when separated within the device by immobile plates, suggesting non-local interactions, a physical impossibility under classical mechanics, but perfectly consistent with quantum entanglement. How could this be? How could ancient metalworkers have manipulated materials at such microscopic precision, crafting mechanisms more advanced than anything conceived until modern supercomputers? Was it luck? Accident? Or something else entirely? Adding to the mystery was the dating. Organic residue in the Bronze Age, as expected, over 2,000 years old. But certain embedded components gave off signatures suggesting they were much younger, as if parts of the device existed in multiple temporal states at once. It was a temporal puzzle hiding in plain sight. When researchers at a European facility attempted to simulate the device's functions using modern computing, they made another discovery. The machine didn't just model the past. It predicted future astronomical events with an accuracy that even modern observatories found eerie. Solar eclipses, planetary alignments, some of which had not occurred yet when the mechanism was made, were etched into its functions as if the maker had seen far beyond their own time. Today, the device is on display behind glass, celebrated as an ancient marvel. But what remains hidden, both in classified labs and in the unanswered questions, is a deeper truth. The Antikythera mechanism may not be the product of its age. It might be a legacy from another, a legacy left to see who would notice. Who would ask how bronze gears could whisper secrets of quantum realms? Who would dare imagine that history doesn't always move forward in straight lines? Sometimes knowledge arrives early, too early, and is left behind like a message in a bottle, waiting for someone in the future to open it and understand. The mechanism isn't just a computer. It's a contradiction, a bridge between the ancient and the impossible. And like many bridges, it makes us ask, who built it? And what world did they come from? In the dense rainforests of Belize, 1927, a shaft of light pierced the canopy and illuminated something impossible, a human skull carved entirely from a single block of crystal. It was found inside a ruined Mayan temple by explorer F.A. Mitchell Hedges. Perfectly shaped, eerily precise, and without a single tool mark, its existence has confounded experts for nearly a century. They called it the Mitchell-Hedges skull, but over time, more surfaced. In South America, Tibet, and even Europe, other crystal skulls emerged, each one carved from quartz, each one flawless in its execution. But what linked them wasn't just their craftsmanship. It was what happened when they were studied closely. Under laboratory conditions, these skulls began to reveal something unsettling. Within their structure were tiny channels, fiber-like paths that bent and refracted light like miniature optic cables. Scientists from Hewlett-Packard, conducting early studies on the Mitchell-Hedges skull, discovered that the skull could manipulate light in complex ways, creating internal holographic projections when exposed to laser beams. It got stranger. When subjected to electromagnetic fields, the skull emitted pulses of light, and when multiple skulls were exposed to the same frequencies, thousands of miles apart, they responded in unison, glowing with synchronized patterns. Researchers began to wonder, were these artifacts not just symbolic or ceremonial, but parts of a system, a network? If so, it was unlike any network known to us. A distributed communication grid built on principles of quantum entanglement, where distance didn't matter and signals traveled without wires or satellites. The crystal skulls seemed to resonate not only with each other, but curiously with us. Tests involving human participants revealed that the skulls responded to emotional states. Changes in thought patterns or focus altered the frequency of emitted light. Some believed this indicated an interface with human consciousness, not machines exactly, but tools designed to interact with the mind. Geochemical analysis deepened the mystery. The quartz used in the skulls contained isotopic ratios unlike any found in Earth's crust. They matched predictions for materials formed in the intense gravitational environments of neutron stars. In other words, the crystal itself may not be of this Earth. And then there were the projections, complex star maps, visible only under specific conditions that aligned with galaxies and systems our telescopes have only recently confirmed. These weren't just carvings, they were data storage devices. Encoded information embedded in crystal, built with precision far beyond the capabilities of ancient hand tools. For decades, the skulls have remained under tight scrutiny, often kept in private collections or classified research facilities. Their public story remains one of mystery and folklore. But behind the scenes, scientists have quietly explored a different question. What if these artifacts are nodes in a communication array? A system left behind to observe, respond, or perhaps awaken when the time is right. Whether crafted by ancient hands or passed down from a source beyond our understanding, the crystal skulls invite us to consider a radical possibility, that consciousness itself might be part of a universal language, that long before we built machines to talk to each other, someone, or something, built crystal to talk to us. They are silent now, but when we listen, truly listen, they shimmer with a message older than memory and stranger than fiction. Perhaps they wait not for discovery, but for understanding. High in the mountains along the China-Tibet border, in a labyrinth of remote caves, an expedition in 1938 uncovered something that would shake the foundations of archaeology, if it had ever been allowed into public view. Hundreds of stone discs, each carved with a tiny central hole and faint spiral grooves, lay buried among ancient burial sites. At first glance, they resembled primitive records. But when examined under magnification, the spirals revealed something extraordinary, microscopic hieroglyphs etched with impossible precision. These came to be known as the Dropa stones. Over 700 were unearthed, each roughly 2 feet in diameter, each bearing unreadable text so fine it was invisible to the naked eye. For years, their meaning remained a mystery. Then, in the 1960s, a Soviet linguist named Dr. Sergei Ladov began decoding the symbols, and what he claimed to find read like science fiction. The discs, he said, were not religious icons or ceremonial items. They were records, technical records. Embedded in those tiny carvings were instructions, descriptions of propulsion systems powered by electromagnetic fields, diagrams of spacecraft using magnetic lifters for vertical thrust. The kind of technology humanity wouldn't explore seriously until the late 20th century. The writing described not just travel, but adaptation. Techniques for altering DNA to survive in new planetary environments, protocols for cellular engineering, blueprints for life reshaped to meet the needs of the cosmos. In short, the stones seem to document an extraterrestrial visit and the biological sciences required to make it sustainable. Skeptics have long dismissed the Dropa stones as myth. But chemical and geological testing tells another story. The discs are estimated to be at least 12,000 years old. Yet the content of their inscriptions describes scientific knowledge that humans didn't acquire until recent decades. Some of the minerals in the stone, too, don't match Earth-based geology. Trace elements in their composition point to origins in meteorite or comet debris, not terrestrial rock. Even more puzzling were the electromagnetic tests. When subjected to a low-voltage current, the discs began to emit faint radio signals. The signals were weak, almost like a heartbeat, but they showed consistent repeating patterns. Patterns suggestive of intentional data encoding. Who created these stones? And why? Were they intended as a message for the future? A kind of hard drive in stone, storing knowledge in a form resistant to decay? Or were they part of something larger? A data set scattered across the world, waiting for humanity to reach a stage advanced enough to decode it. To this day, the Dropa stones are stored deep within Chinese research facilities under military jurisdiction. Independent scholars are denied access. Officially, the stones are labeled as cultural relics. But quietly, the work continues. Deciphering the language, modeling the propulsion systems, tracing the star charts carved into the spirals. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Dropa stones isn't what they say. It's the precision with which they say it. Characters so small they rival the width of a human hair. Diagrams that would require magnification to inscribe. A message, yes, but one seemingly written for eyes far more advanced than those of the Neolithic artists we've imagined. They raise a simple, profound question. Is it possible that some truths about our past have been deliberately encoded for our future? The Dropa stones remain silent, but maybe it's not because they have nothing to say. Maybe it's because we've only just begun to learn how to listen. Tucked deep in the lush jungles of Costa Rica, scattered across fields and hidden beneath moss and soil, lie hundreds of stone spheres, some the size of baseballs, others as large as SUVs. They are nearly perfect. So precise, in fact, that their roundness rivals modern manufacturing standards. And yet they were carved centuries before the existence of any known industrial tools in the Americas. These enigmatic structures, known simply as the Costa Rican spheres or Las Bolas, were first documented in the 1930s during agricultural clearing for banana plantations. At first, they were seen as curiosities, decorative perhaps or symbolic. But soon, researchers noticed something strange. The spheres weren't randomly placed. Their locations formed geometric patterns, lines, triangles, celestial alignments. A deeper study revealed that many of the placements matched star constellations visible only from above. The level of precision would require aerial perspective, something no pre-Columbian civilization is supposed to have had access to. This was just the beginning of the mystery. When researchers from MIT conducted secret studies in the 1970s, they made a startling discovery. Some of the largest spheres were perfect within 2 millimeters. That kind of accuracy, especially in hard granite, requires modern equipment. Lathe systems, laser measurements, and exacting control over material hardness. And yet, these spheres were shaped by people with no written language, no metal tools, and no wheel. But it's what lies inside that truly defies explanation. Ground-penetrating radar and core sampling found that many of the spheres contain inner layers, geometric arrangements of different types of stone, carefully layered like the components of a machine. These internal structures serve no obvious purpose, not decorative, not symbolic. They appear engineered. Then there are the acoustic properties. When exposed to specific frequencies, high-pitched tones or ultrasonic vibrations, the stones respond, they resonate. The sound they emit isn't random. It follows harmonic patterns. Some have theorized that the spheres functioned as resonant devices, transmitting or modulating signals, a kind of prehistoric acoustic technology. Even the stone itself raises questions. Many of the spheres are carved from granodiorite, a rock that doesn't exist in the areas where the spheres were found. It had to be transported over great distances, across rugged terrain, without roads, wheels, or beasts of burden. That suggests logistics far beyond what history assigns to the Diki culture, the civilization credited with creating them. Radiocarbon dating of nearby organic material gave conflicting results. Some material dated to 1,300 years ago, others only a few centuries. In some cases, the same sphere seemed to contain materials from vastly different time periods, as if the spheres had moved through time or existed outside it. Most curious of all were reports of gravitational anomalies. Sensitive measurements showed that objects placed near the largest spheres occasionally registered minor fluctuations in weight. Not enough to cause alarm, but enough to raise eyebrows. Could these stones somehow interact with local gravitational fields? If so, the implications would be profound. Today, the spheres are considered cultural treasures. Many are protected, yet few are truly understood. Their origins are often attributed to ritual, to art. But art alone doesn't explain the precision, the engineering, the star maps. What if these spheres weren't made to be seen, but to be sensed? What if they're not monuments, but mechanisms? They sit in silence now, weathered by centuries, half swallowed by the jungle. But their presence endures, a quiet reminder that even the most grounded artifacts can point to the stars. Across the dry plateaus of southern Peru, etched into the earth like ancient signatures, stretch the mysterious lines of Nazca. At ground level, they appear as simple pathways, but from above, they transform into hummingbirds, spiders, geometric patterns, and ruler straight lines that span miles. For decades, they've puzzled archaeologists and inspired endless theories, but the real mystery lies beneath the surface. In the 1970s, with NASA support, researcher Maria Reiche began studying the lines using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar. What she and her team uncovered shocked even the most skeptical scientists. The lines weren't just artworks. They were part of a system, a network of guidance pathways aligned not just with celestial events, but with precise topographic and magnetic coordinates. Some lines stretched over 30 miles, yet maintained perfect straightness across hills and valleys, something nearly impossible without aerial survey equipment. Others formed complex geometries that encoded mathematical ratios, angles, and astronomical alignments. From the air, they looked like navigational aids. From space, they resembled something else entirely, a coded map. Then came the physical analysis. Soil samples from the lines revealed that the ground had been altered using extreme heat, fused into a thin layer of glass-like material. This wasn't done by hand. It required temperatures far beyond what fire or friction could produce in the ancient world. The most likely explanation? Directed energy, perhaps laser-like technology used to engrave the Earth. As researchers examined the subsurface further, they found embedded structures, channels of mineral-rich sediment that conducted electromagnetic energy. When tested with controlled frequencies, these channels amplified radio waves. It was as if the lines were part of a massive communication grid designed to transmit signals skyward, signals that could, in theory, be received from orbit. Some patterns even responded to electromagnetic pulses, emitting frequencies in return. That's not art. That's engineering. And then there were the alignments. The longest lines, when extended mathematically, intersected with underground aquifers, mineral deposits, and fault lines. Others aligned with ancient star positions, particularly those only visible from far southern latitudes. To map these locations so precisely, the creators would have needed a view from the sky, or knowledge passed from someone who had it. The question isn't just how the Nazca lines were made, it's why. Who would need landing strips that only make sense from high altitude? Who would need transmission lines encoded in the desert? Who or what was the intended recipient? Modern analysis suggests the lines operate much like an ancient GPS grid. A positioning system, not just to navigate the land, but to connect with something above it. Pilots flying over the region have long reported anomalies, compass deviations, sudden loss of radio signals, and unexplained turbulence directly over certain patterns. If the Nazca lines were indeed a communication and guidance system, it changes everything. It implies that 2,000 years ago there was contact with, or anticipation of, flight. Not symbolic flight. Actual engineered aviation. Today, the lines are a World Heritage Site. Tourists fly overhead marveling at their beauty, rarely questioning their function. But buried in the soil, embedded in the math, and etched into their silence, is a message. It's not just a call to the gods. It might be a beacon, or a blueprint, one whose signal is still waiting to be received. The Nazca lines remind us that sometimes what looks like art is actually architecture, for minds that move not across deserts, but across stars. In 1974, along the banks of the Mureș River near Aiud, Romania, workers excavating a trench stumbled upon a strange metallic object buried alongside fossilized bones of a mastodon. The bones were estimated to be 20,000 years old. But the object? It was made of aluminum, an element humans didn't isolate until the 19th century. The artifact was wedge-shaped, about 8 inches long, and unnervingly modern in appearance. At first, it was thought to be a piece of aircraft debris. But further examination revealed the truth. Its alloy composition, 89% aluminum, along with copper, zinc, and rare trace elements, matched no known manufacturing technique from any point in recorded history. This object shouldn't exist. Not because aluminum is rare. It's actually one of the most abundant elements in Earth's crust, but because refining it requires advanced electrochemical processes, high temperatures, and precise control over chemical reactions. Techniques that weren't developed until the Industrial Revolution. Yet this aluminum artifact lay buried beneath soil that had not been disturbed for tens of thousands of years. Its surface bore machine marks, uniform grooves consistent with modern milling or precision machining. Its shape was aerodynamic, consistent with components designed for flight or structural stress. Engineers who reviewed the object noted it resembled landing gear or heat shielding, capable of withstanding extreme conditions. What startled researchers even more was its resistance to oxidation. Aluminum naturally forms a dull oxide layer within hours of exposure to air, but this piece retained a metallic sheen, as if it had been treated with protective coatings far beyond the abilities of ancient metallurgists. X-ray crystallography revealed another surprise. The internal molecular structure showed signs of rapid cooling from extreme temperatures, something only achievable in industrial furnaces operating at thousands of degrees. Its atomic arrangement didn't match any known method of aluminum production. And then there were the isotopic ratios. The aluminum contained rare isotopes not found in Earth's natural ore deposits. Their signature pointed to stellar origins, material formed in supernovae, not in the geological processes of Earth. The artifact's placement next to Mastodon remains only deepened the mystery. Either it was placed there thousands of years after the bones fossilized, despite no evidence of later disturbance, or it had been there the whole time. The latter suggests something truly radical. That the object existed before or during the last ice age. Was it lost? Dropped? Part of something larger? Theories range from ancient high technology to a misfiled modern component, but none explain the alloy's composition, its age, or its impeccable preservation. Today, the so-called Aiud artifact is under state protection in Romania, removed from public view. Occasionally, photos circulate. Occasionally, someone asks the right questions. But the answers remain elusive. Maybe it's a fragment from a craft that visited long before human memory, or a piece of knowledge passed down, lost, and then unearthed in a time unready to understand it. What makes the artifact remarkable isn't just its physical properties, it's its timeline. It exists out of step, as if history took a detour that we've only now begun to notice. Sometimes, the most profound discoveries aren't ancient carvings or scrolls, they're tools. Tools that were never supposed to survive. Tools that whisper, quietly but persistently, "You are not the first." In 1998, deep in Russia's remote Kaluga region, a group of geologists made a baffling discovery. While studying ancient rock formations dating back over 300 million years, they stumbled upon something that defied explanation, a microscopic screw embedded in solid stone. Less than a millimeter long, the spiral object was unmistakably manufactured. But the age of the rock? It predated the rise of even the simplest life forms. They called it the Russian tungsten screw, and despite its size, it might be one of the most disturbing artifacts ever found. Electron microscopy confirmed its shape, threaded, uniform, and mechanically precise. The spiral grooves were consistent with modern screw manufacturing, right down to the pitch and diameter. The fact that it was made of tungsten, a dense metal with a melting point over 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, only deepened the mystery. Tungsten is notoriously difficult to work with, even using today's best tools. But somehow this tiny object had been engineered at a scale and with materials that we still struggle to replicate. Further analysis revealed something even more bizarre. The tungsten contained isotopes rarely found on Earth, matching those formed during supernova explosions. In other words, the screw wasn't just advanced, it may have been made from material forged in the heart of dying stars. The precision of the threads pointed to computer-guided machinery. The dimensions were so exact that they adhered to mathematical constants, thread pitch and angle-matched specifications used in aerospace and quantum computing components. No random process could produce this. No geological quirk could explain it. And it wasn't alone. Similar screws and metallic micro-objects have been found in other ancient formations around the world. South America, Asia, even Antarctica, always in ancient rock, always exhibiting the same mechanical traits. As if they were part of a system, scattered and buried across the globe in a time before time. Attempts to replicate the screw's structure at nanoscales have failed. Our current tools can approach its size, but not its material complexity. The atomic arrangement of the metal suggests a level of manufacturing control down to the molecular level, something that ventures into the domain of theoretical materials science. So what is it? A component from a probe? A sensor? A piece of machinery buried eons ago and preserved by deep time? One unsettling possibility is that Earth has been observed, maybe even visited, long before the emergence of human beings. If these screws were part of such devices, They might be remnants of monitoring systems, long-forgotten instruments still waiting to be uncovered. The Russian tungsten screw is now housed in a state-controlled research facility. Access is limited, study is ongoing, and the official explanation remains vague. But those who've seen the evidence firsthand are left with a troubling realization. Either our understanding of Earth's history is wrong, or someone else was here and left behind proof that outlasted epochs. What's most haunting is the size of it. Not a monument, not a towering ruin, just a thread, a whisper. Sometimes the most powerful messages are the smallest ones, and this one says very clearly precision, purpose, presence. Whether it was buried by design or accident, one thing is certain: something once walked this earth with technology beyond our wildest imagining, and it left behind a screw and stone to prove it. In the gold-rich soils of South Africa's Wonder Stone mines, something emerged from the depths, something small, round, and impossible. Workers unearthed dozens of metallic spheres, each about an inch wide, with strange grooves etched evenly around their equators. Some were perfectly balanced, rotating on their own within sealed display cases. But the most staggering fact? These spheres were found in geological layers dated to 2.8 billion years ago. They were quickly dubbed the Klerksdorp spheres, though that name hardly captures the strangeness of their existence. Scientists initially proposed natural origins, perhaps formed by volcanic activity or sedimentary processes. But the deeper the analysis went, the harder that explanation became to sustain. First, there was the material itself. Many of the spheres were made from a compound of metal and hematite, with traces of nickel, suggesting an artificial alloy. Their hardness rivaled industrial steel. And the grooves? Each one was identical, encircling the sphere's middle with machine-like precision. No known natural process creates grooves like that. Then came the electromagnetic tests. Some spheres generated faint but measurable electromagnetic fields. When placed in controlled environments, they responded to stimuli, vibrating subtly or rotating under conditions that should have left them inert. One sphere, in particular, completed a full revolution inside a sealed case every 128 hours. No motors, no external force, just motion, steady and unexplained. Attempts to damage the spheres revealed something even more astonishing. When scratched, their surfaces repaired themselves, not over days or weeks, but within hours. Under high-resolution imaging, scientists observed microscopic changes in the molecular structure, self-healing properties more advanced than any materials technology we currently possess. X-ray scans revealed internal components, fine filaments, chambers, and grid-like structures smaller than a virus. These were not simple metal balls. They were machines operating at nanoscales, with functions we still cannot comprehend. Speculation ran wild. Were they storage devices, beacons, surveillance probes? Some suggested they were seeds, technological spores planted long ago, waiting for a trigger. Others believed they were relics of an intelligence that visited Earth billions of years before life as we know it emerged. Their origin remains one of the greatest puzzles in archaeology and geology alike. Natural explanations fall short. Artificial ones raise even harder questions. If these spheres are truly that old, if they were manufactured in a time before multicellular life, then someone or something possessed knowledge of metallurgy, nanotechnology, and perpetual motion long before Earth had a breathable atmosphere. The living metal spheres are now stored in secure locations, with only a handful remaining on public display. But their legacy lives on, not in textbooks, but in the quiet murmurs of those who've seen them up close. They challenge everything we know about time, intelligence, and technology, because they shouldn't exist. And yet they do. In the slow, measured spin of a perfect sphere from 2 billion years ago, we find a message. One not written in words, but in swends, symmetry, and resistance to decay. Sometimes the past leaves behind clues not in ruins or fossils, but in perfect, humming machines that outlast everything else. And in their stillness, they ask the question we fear most: what came before us? Beneath the ancient sands of Iraq, a seemingly simple clay jar sat hidden for centuries, until it revealed a current that could power a modern light bulb. In the dark waters off Greece, a bronze machine whispered in the language of quantum physics. High in the Andes, enormous lines carved into the earth pointed to the sky, not just as art, but as something more, as messages. 10 artifacts, 10 riddles, each one blurring the boundary between the ancient and the impossible. What ties them together is not just their defiance of historical timelines, but their shared silence, the way they are stored, hidden, explained away. Now, we arrive at the most unsettling realization of all. These artifacts are not isolated anomalies. They form a pattern that suggests intent. In the deepest vaults of governments, behind layers of classification, they rest, untouched by time, but heavy with implication. Scientists who've glimpsed them speak of material science that shouldn't exist, isotopes that defy Earth's natural composition, and functions that seem designed to respond not only to energy, but to thought, emotion, awareness. What kind of intelligence creates machines that heal themselves, spin without force, or communicate through light and resonance? What kind of civilization leaves behind technology encoded in stone, crystal, and metal, not to dominate, but to endure? Maybe these aren't just artifacts. Maybe they're breadcrumbs, a trail left for someone or something to find. Not proof of conquest, but of presence. Not warnings, but invitations. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't how they were made, but why they were left. To show us what's possible, to test whether we're ready, to remind us that we're not the first to gaze at the stars and wonder, or maybe they're simply mirrors, objects that reflect not only a forgotten past, but a potential future, one in which technology and consciousness are not separate, one in which knowledge is not linear, but cyclical. In these silent remnants, we find more than evidence of advanced craft. We find questions that refuse to be buried, questions that echo through centuries and across continents, questions that governments lock behind steel doors because their answers would upend everything. And yet the artifacts remain, waiting, enduring. The Roswell debris that bends and unbends like memory itself. The Baghdad jars that hum with electric charge. The skulls that light up in the presence of thought. The discs that whisper in spirals. The spheres that spin alone in glass boxes. Each one is a paradox, a key to a door we haven't yet opened, a chapter torn from a book we're only beginning to read. So what do we do with them? Do we keep them hidden, feared, and classified? Or do we let them challenge our assumptions, our science, our very sense of identity? Maybe the real test is not whether these artifacts are real, but whether we have the courage to ask what they mean, and if we do, what kind of story we're willing to tell next. Because the moment we accept that the past might be stranger than we imagined, the future becomes far more open than we feared. And that, perhaps, is the true purpose of these forbidden artifacts, to show us that we've always been part of a larger story, one still unfolding beneath our feet. There's a hush that follows every great discovery, the breathless moment between finding and understanding. For centuries, humans have unearthed the remnants of forgotten times, broken pottery, ancient bones, rusted swords. But these 10 artifacts are different. They do not crumble with age. They do not reveal the past, weighing it down with dates and dust. Instead, they challenge the very notion of time, asking us to consider a version of history that doesn't fit inside our textbooks. In a world defined by certainty, they remain defiantly uncertain. The Antikythera device isn't just a marvel of ancient engineering. It is a machine that hints at quantum logic in the hands of people we thought still lived in myth. The crystal skulls pulse with patterns when touched by thought, behaving less like relics and more like companions. The Dropa stones encode physics we've only just begun to understand, suggesting that someone, somewhere, knew the nature of gravity and DNA long before we named them, and they were not accidents. Each artifact was created with precision. They were placed, not dropped, buried, not forgotten. Every thread, groove, and glimmer seems to say, "We were here," and maybe still are, but this story is not about aliens, at least not in the way movies tell it. It is about presence. It is about the unsettling, beautiful idea that intelligence is not bound to one species, one planet, or one linear path. That maybe, long before we lit our first fires or wrote our first words, someone else walked this earth and left behind more than bones and shadows. We have asked the wrong questions for too long. Rather than ask if these things are real, we should ask why they were hidden. Why governments classify metal shards and stone disks. Why researchers lose access after initial reports. Why silence always follows discovery. The answer may not be control. It may be fear. Fear of what it would mean to rewrite everything. Fear that we are not at the peak of human history, but at its rediscovery. Yet in that fear is opportunity. What if these artifacts are invitations? What if they are signals meant not to frighten us, but to awaken us, to remind us that we're not alone in the universe, nor in time? That intelligence evolves in many forms, and we are simply one part of a larger unfolding. They say history is written by the victors. But what if some history was written for the dreamers? Maybe the purpose of these artifacts is not to explain, but to inspire. Not to provide answers, but to raise the right questions. Questions about what it means to be human. About what lies ahead. About the kind of ancestors we want to become. These are not the whispers of conspiracy theorists. They are the echoes of something far older and far wiser, carved in crystal and cast in metal. They are reminders. That wonder still exists, that the unknown is not our enemy, but our inheritance, and that sometimes the strangest truths are the ones that bring us closest to what we truly are. Not alone, not the first, and not yet finished. In the end, it comes back to a single question, one that hums quietly beneath every discovery, every artifact, every anomaly. What kind of story are we willing to tell about ourselves? For centuries, we've crafted a narrative of progress, from cave fires to skyscrapers, from stone tools to silicon chips. We see ourselves as the pinnacle of a long, slow climb. But what if that story is incomplete? What if it skips pages? What if, hidden beneath our certainty, there's another history, a parallel tale told not in words, but in the silent language of forgotten technologies? The Roswell memory medal, the Baghdad batteries, the Dropa stones, the Costa Rican spheres. These aren't just strange objects, they are interruptions. They disrupt the clean line of progress we've drawn for ourselves. They suggest that knowledge is not always linear, that intelligence may rise, fall, and rise again, or arrive from somewhere else entirely. And what do we do when confronted with such evidence? Too often, we bury it. We classify, dismiss, reframe, because it's easier to protect the story than to rewrite it. But stories are not static. They evolve, they grow, and maybe now is the time to let ours grow too. This isn't about proving visitors from the stars. It's about listening, about honoring the possibility that the universe is more intricate, more layered, more conscious than we imagined. That we are not merely inhabitants of Earth, but participants in something vast, something ancient. The forbidden artifacts may never receive a public acknowledgement. Their names may never appear in museums. But they don't need to. because their power lies in what they evoke: awe, humility, and a deep yearning to know more. They ask us to look beyond the visible horizon, to question what else might be true if we're willing to shed certainty for curiosity. Because in the end, we are explorers, not just of space or sea, but of truth itself. And sometimes the path forward begins with looking back, with dusting off the things we were told not to see. So perhaps the greatest secret these artifacts hold isn't about who made them or where they came from. Maybe the secret is this: that we too are capable of greatness, that our potential is far beyond what history books have shown us, that somewhere in our future, just as in our past, lies the power to imagine the impossible and make it real. And maybe that's why they were left, not as warnings, but as reminders that we are not alone and never have been.